Lara had always been the daring one, the friend who thrived on adrenaline, never backing down from a challenge. So when her friends dared her to drive alone down a haunted stretch of highway known as Silent Bend Road, she barely hesitated. The road was infamous, steeped in local legends of people who had vanished, travelers who had wandered onto the path and never returned. Some claimed it was a portal to the spirit world, while others whispered of ancient curses. But Lara wasn't one to believe in ghost stories. To her, fear was just another thrill. She packed her car with snacks, her phone and a flashlight, prepared for what she expected to be a night of laughs at her friend's expense. As she set out, the night was exceptionally dark. The moon hid behind thick, oppressive clouds, and an unnatural chill lingered in the air. Her headlights sliced through the dense fog as she drove, casting long shadows that seemed to flicker and shift. The trees on either side of the road grew taller and denser, their branches intertwining to form a dark tunnel above her. It was as if the road was closing in, swallowing her whole. Even the air felt heavy, like an invisible weight pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Near the entrance to Silent Bend Road, she noticed an old, weather-beaten sign, barely legible in the dim light. "Turn back now." She chuckled to herself, imagining the old townsfolk putting it there as a joke to scare people away. "Nice try," she murmured, rolling her eyes as she drove past it. But the further she went, the more the road seemed to stretch on endlessly, each twist and turn like a taunt, daring her to go further. The only sounds were the crunch of gravel beneath her tires and the occasional eerie whisper of the wind through the trees. Several miles in, she reached to turn on the radio, hoping to drown out the unsettling silence. But all she got was static. She tried switching stations, but nothing came through. Glancing at her phone, she saw it had inexplicably died, despite being fully charged when she left. She tapped at the screen in frustration, but it remained dark. With a sigh, she tossed it onto the passenger seat, determined not to let these minor inconveniences spoil her night. Then, the radio crackled to life. Lara jumped, startled by the sudden noise. She hadn't touched it, but a faint, distorted voice whispered through the static. "Turn back. Now. Before it's too late." Her heart skipped a beat, and she quickly turned the dial, trying to find another station, but the voice only grew louder, echoing as though it came from somewhere deep within the car itself. "Turn back, Lara," it hissed, her name dripping with an otherworldly malice. She laughed nervously, brushing it off as a coincidence, though her fingers tightened on the steering wheel. Determined to shake off her growing unease, she pressed down on the gas, watching the speedometer climb as the car hurtled deeper into the shadows. The road wound and twisted, each turn sharper than the last, pulling her further into the dark, isolated forest. Her headlights struggled to penetrate the thickening fog, casting strange, ghostly shapes that seemed to move and breathe along the roadside. Suddenly, her headlights caught something up ahead. She slammed on the brakes, tires skidding as she came to an abrupt halt. Standing in the middle of the road was a young girl, her skin pale and sallow, her dress torn and drenched as though she had just emerged from a lake. Lara's breath caught in her throat. The girl's long, dark hair clung to her face, and her empty eyes glowed faintly, hollow and soulless. "Are you okay?" Lara called out, her voice trembling as she rolled down the window slightly. The girl didn't respond, but slowly lifted a hand, pointing toward the back seat of the car. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Still, Lara heard her voice clear as day, echoing inside her mind. "Help me!" Heart racing, Lara glanced over her shoulder, peering into the darkened back seat. There was no one there, yet the air felt thick, oppressive, as though something unseen was lurking just out of sight. When she turned back, the girl was gone. A chill ran down her spine, and she felt an overwhelming urge to leave, to escape whatever force had drawn her here. She slammed her foot on the accelerator, speeding down the road, her pulse pounding in her ears. The fog grew thicker, swallowing the car until she could barely see a few feet in front of her. Shadows began to form at the edges of her vision, faint outlines of people, their faces twisted and hollow, watching her from the trees. She could almost hear them whispering, their voices blending into a haunting symphony, calling her name, begging her to join them. As she rounded another bend, the road opened up, revealing a dense forest shrouded in mist. Her headlights illuminated a wooden sign, old and splintered, with faded letters barely visible. Welcome to Silent Bend. She felt a sense of déjà vu, as if she'd passed this sign before. Had she been here already? Was she going in circles? Panic gripped her as she realized the road had somehow twisted back on itself, trapping her in an endless loop. Her knuckles turned white as she gripped the wheel, and she pressed harder on the gas, desperate to escape. But the further she drove, the darker and colder it became. She could barely see the road now, her headlights swallowed by the thickening fog. And then the radio crackled again, a voice whispering in a language she didn't understand. It sounded ancient, almost ritualistic, like a chant. She felt an inexplicable pull. An urge to stop, to leave the car, to walk into the woods. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw her again, the girl standing at the side of the road, staring at her with those hollow, soulless eyes. But this time, the girl was not alone. Dozens of figures stood behind her, each one draped in shadow, their faces gaunt and expressionless, their eyes empty and dark. They moved closer, surrounding the car, their arms reaching out, fingers curling as though trying to pull her out, to drag her into the darkness with them. Lara screamed, slamming her foot on the gas once more, the car lurching forward. She drove blindly, the trees blurring past her as the road twisted and turned. But no matter how fast she went, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were following her. Keeping pace, their ghostly forms gliding through the fog, always just out of sight. She glanced in the rearview mirror, and her blood ran cold. In the back seat, she saw the girl, her face inches from Lara's own, her cold breath fogging up the glass, her eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Lara let out a strangled cry, jerking the wheel as she tried to swerve, to shake the ghostly apparition. But the car skidded, spinning wildly out of control, and the world went dark. When the locals found her car the next morning, it was abandoned, the doors hanging open, the seats soaked with water. There was no sign of Lara, but the radio continued to play, a faint, distorted voice whispering her name. They say if you listen closely, you can still hear her screams echoing through the trees, forever lost on Silent Bend Road.